506 on 105.9 FM WMAL. Dan Mandis here, in for Vince Coglianese. Appreciate you being here, and want to welcome on into the program. I thought this is really interesting. Andrew Kerr, investigative reporter at the Washington Free Beacon. Andrew, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm reading through this story about how it looks like, and the headline is, Biden's favorite super PAC used illegal scheme to conceal its donors. And I guess I'm just a little confused, Andrew, because hasn't President Biden said in the very recent past, actually, that this kind of dark money donations, they erode the public trust and they need to be outlawed? Yet this is one of President Biden's favorite PACs. And so it's called the Future Forward PAC, and they have an affiliated dark money PAC as well that is affiliated with this. And so talk a little bit about the $400 million that this Political Action Committee has raised.
Hey, thanks, Dan, for having me on. And yeah, you're right. Joe Biden condemned dark money as a serious problem facing our democracy just a few months ago. And now the White House is embracing this group that essentially is pouring in earmarked contributions from its affiliated 501c4 nonprofit group in a manner that bears striking resemblance to cases that have led to massive fines and even jail time for other operators of super PACs. So the problem here for Future Forward is that it reported to the IRS, the dark money side of it, reported to the IRS that it received over $3 million in donations and then promptly and directly delivered them to the super PAC. The super PAC then reports to the Federal Election Committee that it received that $3.4 million from the dark money group. What legal experts tell me, and a former Federal Election Commissioner, is that when you report a transaction such as this, that you have to report the actual names of the donors behind those funds. And what Future Forward did is they just hid those names behind the veil of its dark money group. There was a individual that ran a super PAC down in Puerto Rico in 2022 that was sentenced to 14 months in prison for laundering political contributions to his super PAC through his nonprofit groups, and in a very similar manner to this. So, we'll see what happens next. Almost surely there's going to be some complaints filed with the Federal Election Commission, which is to request enforcement on this matter. So, I think
I guess part of what confuses me is I know that I've seen stories where Republicans and Republican groups have gotten in a lot of trouble for this kind of thing. Do you think the same fate will fall, folks on the left for this kind of, it just seems to me like a shell game. But if they're supposed to be exposing and naming their donors once it goes into the super PAC, I mean, that's a pretty obvious rule. And if they're choosing to break it, then they should suffer the same consequences, shouldn't they?
Yeah, and campaign finance rules are pretty complicated in some regard. So it's legal for a dark money group to pour money into a super PAC and for the donors to be hidden in most cases. But when you have someone that's donating to a dark money group and then they direct their donation, they tell the dark money group, hey, I want you to forward my donation to the super PAC just so you can hide my name from the public. In that case, the donor's name needs to be disclosed. And that's what Future Forward did do in this case. And there's a conservative group in 2017, the American Conservative Union was fined $350,000 for doing this. They passed a $1.7 million contribution to a super PAC, and they hid the donation from the FEC, and the FEC came in and imposed a pretty massive fine on the group. The fact pattern there is remarkably similar to what Future Forward did. So, it seems to be a pretty slam dunk case that at the very least the FEC should be looking into this, because they did they took this very seriously when a conservative group did it a few years ago.
Well, you're talking about a lot of money too. I mean, $400 million over the past 5 years. This isn't just there's no other way to say this. This doesn't seem to me your run of the mill PAC. I mean, this is one that is raising I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they say that the president is going to start doing, some events to support this PAC in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, the White House told the New York Times, or officials with the White House last month told the New York Times that, this group came pretty much out of nowhere in 2018 and then just started raising massive sums of money to support the president in 2020 and Democrats in the midterm elections. And the president's been so impressed by this group's work that he's essentially endorsing it. It's like this is going to be the main outside vehicle to support his reelection campaign in 2024. It's taking the spot as the main Democratic super PAC from Priorities USA. There's kind of a changing of the guard here to this group, Future Forward, and it's just incredibly noteworthy that they're using fundraising tactics that have led to massive fines and even jail time for other super PAC operators.
I thought this line was interesting, and a lot of this stuff is foreign to me. So, but I do see this line in the article that we're talking about. The super PAC in public filings claimed it raised just $67,000 in the first half of 2023. But weeks earlier, it told the New York Times it had raised $50 million during that time, indicating that the overwhelming majority of those funds flowed through Future Forward USA Action. The super PAC's dark money affiliate does not have to report its 2023 finances to the IRS until after the 2024 election. And so, to the layman that might be driving around, it does sound, you mentioned that, this is all very complicated, but it does sound shady.
Yeah, and the payout, there's pros and cons operating a super PAC. The pro is that you can spend unlimited money influencing elections. The downside is that you have to disclose who's funding you to the public. The public deserves to know who's financing these groups, who's pouring all this money in, and who's trying to influence our opinions. But in recent years, there's been a lot of these super PACs have started these affiliated dark money groups that don't have to disclose their donors, and so they route the contributions through the 501c4 dark money arm, and that's what this group is doing. But again, like I mentioned before, they kind of have to couch it in that their donors aren't giving to the dark money side specifically for their contributions to then be passed over to the super PAC. They can't be earmarked like that. They just have to be general contributions. But what Future Forward did in this case is they just out and admitted that, yeah, we accepted earmarked contributions, but we're still hiding the donors. And that's a big no-no from what legal experts that we quoted in the story are saying.
Last question, not to politicize this. Do both sides, and again, this is not my area, so I may be stepping into a very silly question. Do both sides do this, sort of obfuscation of, the donors for the dark money, or is this something that is, by and large a Democrat thing? If it's obviously a Democrat thing, this is what we're talking about. Do Republicans do the same thing?
Republicans do it. Democrats have truly become the kings of dark money in recent years. When you look at it in a macro view, just the full political landscape, Democrats are raising far more dark money than Republicans are, and it's quite hypocritical given that it's Democrats that are coming out calling dark money the scourge of democracy. It is common to see there are dark money groups on both sides, and of course there are. If you're doing it legally, it's a lot easier to raise money for a dark money group because then your large donors don't have the risk of their names becoming public, and that's worth it to them. But these dark money groups, there are certain restrictions. They don't have as much flexibility to engage in politics as a super PAC does, which is why in Future Forward's case, having them passing these earmarked contributions over to the PAC side and still concealing the donors' names, that's kind of a big deal, and that's why the authorities have treated it so seriously in the past. So we'll see what they do in regards to these facts here with Future Forward.
It's interesting, and this may be just a snarky comment on my end, but you've got the president out there talking about, and all the president's inner circle liking this future forward, this preeminent super PAC and so forth. And clearly, you're right. The president, on the one hand, he's been out there talking about how this kind of dark money erodes the public trust, yet his own administration, his own party is raising millions of dollars in this fashion, obviously hypocritical. Do you think the president even notices how hypocritical he's being?
I think he does, but I guess I'm cynical in that regard. I mean, a lot of the biggest, the largest Democratic dark money network is called it's managed by Arabella Advisors. They manage a collection of funds that bring in billions of dollars a year, and one of their executives said a few years ago that as long as these are the current rules that allow us to raise dark money and influence elections to an extent, we're going to play by those rules, even though we want the rules to be changed. And I think that Joe Biden would have a better argument if he came out like that, hey, these rules should be changed, but in the meantime, we're going to take full advantage of the structures that we have available to us. But instead, he's coming out and saying that these tactics are a threat to democracy, this dark money, and so that it's just purely hypocritical there. If this was so bad and did pose such a dangerous threat to this country, then why are you coming out there? Why is your White House coming out there and saying that we fully intend to leverage this group to help secure re-election in 2024? It just doesn't add up.
Oh, and Andrew, the thing is, and this will be, my last, question for you. It's not even really a question, more of a statement. If you want to, add your 2 cents, that'd be great. But, it seems like this president can be hypocritical. This president can say things and do things that are demonstrably false, obviously a lie, obviously hypocritical, and many in the media just allow him to get away with it. And so he says these things and he does these things and he doesn't suffer any real ramifications because the networks won't cover it. And so it's one thing for, you and I to talk about this on WMAL, but, by and large, the networks, I mean, they'll barely cover, the things that he lies about every single day. This kind of a thing, it just doesn't seem like this is something they would cover because they're trying to protect Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this story develops. I think there's going to be more to come on this group. So, we'll see if they'll get some more pickup in the mainstream press.
All right, we'll see. Andrew Kerr, investigative reporter at the Washington Free Beacon. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us here on WMAL. And it's so fascinating, all of this dark money stuff. And every single day I've got a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on WTN. And, there's always these stories about Joe Biden and, some of the things that Biden says and some of the things that he does. I mean, I'm reasonably certain that the lies of Joe Biden have been, sort of cataloged here on WMAL like they have on my show in Nashville. But every time you turn around, the president is saying something hypocritical. The president is saying something that is a blatant lie. I mean, it could be something as simply, proven as, the border is closed. And everybody knows that the border has not been closed, but Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas and, all the president's men and women, they flap their gums and they lie. And oftentimes the media simply will not cover it. And that's part of what gets me so frustrated as I cover this White House every single day is you hear the lies and you hear the things that they say and you hear the things that they do. And you wonder, is this an administration that is even capable of telling the truth? I mean, look, I've got a great example for you right now with Karine Jean-Pierre as she is being asked about Hunter Biden and the whole situation with the special counsel appointment of one David Weiss. This was from earlier today at the White House press briefing.
Discuss at all the president's personal reaction to, as a father, of the special counsel being appointed to continue the Hunter Biden probe?
Yeah, she was asked the question, does the president, as a father and a president, does he have any kind of a reaction to the fact that Merrick Garland has appointed David Weiss as this special counsel? Well, I'll play you the answer of Cringe Jean. I call her Cringe. Cringe Jean-Pierre. I will play you her answer coming up next right here on 105.9 FM. Well, trying to make sense of all of this stuff. 527, Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese, News Talk 105.9, WMAL. So, Cringe Jean-Pierre, you know, sometimes I feel like, all right, maybe I'll give the White House press corps some modicum of credit for trying to get an answer out of Corinne Jean-Pierre related to any number of things, quite frankly. But, you know, she was asked several times earlier today about the special counsel appointment of David Weiss. And, you know, over and over and over again, Corinne Jean-Pierre basically gave what I would say was a non-answer.
So let me just first say, and you've heard me say this before, that this case was handled independently by the Justice Department under leadership of a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney.
Well, it really wasn't independent. I mean, just see that. Remember earlier I was talking about that's what I mean about the lies. You know, in her very breathy, eye-rolly kind of way, she'll say, oh, no. This was an independent It really was not an independent investigation.
As you all know, this is consistent with what the president has been saying for a long while now, going way back to his campaign days, that he would restore the Department of Justice independence from political interference from the White House. And this is want to make sure that we continue that. Since the White House hasn't been involved, just to be clear again, certainly I would refer you to any questions.
I think she might be protesting too much
about this specifically to Department of Justice and certainly to Hunter Biden.
Anyway, so that's Corinne Jean-Pierre gleefully not answering the question. Now, coming up next, some great audio from Andrew McCarthy. That is coming up next on Just This and a whole lot more straight ahead on WMAL. 535 News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Appreciate you being here. The phone number is always 888-630-9625, 888-630 WMAL. So I'm going to spare you. You're welcome. I'm going to spare you any more audio from Cringe Jean-Pierre because, quite frankly, there's no answers there. There's nothing but lies and obfuscations, and she is the queen of that, by the way. And so, going to move on to a couple of guys who do have the answers. Actually, three. I'm going to try to fit all of this audio in regarding David Weiss being named as a special counsel, courtesy of Merrick Garland. And so, there's a lot here. You know, first of all, in the audio that I played for you, you had Corinne Jean-Pierre trying to convince the White House reporters that the investigation, the DOJ investigation, has been independent of the Biden administration, even though you have IRS whistleblowers that are saying that, no, actually, you had the DOJ obstructing this investigation at every turn. You have an FBI person who is an FBI agent who is backing up the claims made by the IRS agents. And, I mean, I could go on and on. I feel like everybody knows all of this. But Andrew McCarthy, talking about the situation with David Weiss being the special counsel, he said, you know, just so everybody knows, technically, David Weiss isn't actually a special counsel.
Well, first of all, he keeps being called a special counsel. He's not a special counsel, not under the regulations. Now, let's be clear, the Attorney General of the United States can pick whoever he wants to investigate whatever he wants. So I am not saying that the appointment or the picking of Weiss to do this investigation is invalid. However, he's not a special counsel. A special counsel under the regulations is supposed to be an attorney who's brought in from outside the government to investigate because the Justice Department has a conflict of interest.
Right. Now that does seem to be more of a guideline than a rule. Seems to be something where, okay, well, it would be preferable if it was an attorney from outside of the Department of Justice. John Durham, by the way, for example, he was an attorney out of U.S. attorney out of Connecticut. So he was also a DOJ lawyer. But Robert Mueller, if you recall, Robert Mueller was a retired FBI director. So, they come in all forms, these investigations. But the bottom line is that regardless as to whether or not anyone really accepts this guy as a special counsel, it does seem like David Weiss is going to be serving in the role of a special counsel. And I think for many people who have watched him over the last 5 years and the very, what I would say, piss-poor investigation of Hunter Biden, I think there's a lot of people that are looking at this and they're suspicious, because there's been time and time again of evidence and allegations of going soft on Hunter Biden and doing everything they could to ensure that the investigation didn't get close to the president.
What he's doing, what Garland is doing, is assigning the case to Weiss, which is no change because it's been assigned to him since 2018, and labeling him a special counsel, but he's not a special counsel under the regulations of the Justice Department for that process. And the reason he's doing that is try to convey the impression to people that there's some kind of independent integrity to this investigation, which is laughable given the way that it's been conducted to this point.
I love that term, laughable, and he is absolutely right. This investigation, it doesn't have any credibility. And so what you have now is Merrick Garland. The media is going to try to spin this, and I've been watching this all day. I need a drink. So you have the media trying to say in very hushed tones, they're very serious news voices, where they're talking about how this is a very serious situation for Hunter Biden. And it is a serious situation. But they're also not reporting that this is also a situation where it could impede the investigations of James Comer and Jim Jordan and others. Because if David Weiss is hauled in front of Congress, he could just say, I don't know what to tell you. But there's an ongoing investigation in my office, and so I can't answer the questions. So a lot of people are now saying that this is a way for the DOJ to protect itself. They talk about in this interview with Andrew McCarthy, one of my faves, by the way, he talks about, the example of the statute of limitations, because I've just been playing you, and giving you different examples of how the David Weiss investigation, about how they've been trying at all costs to protect Joe Biden, go easy on Hunter Biden as well. We've been talking about that plea deal that fell apart. Everybody knows that thing was a joke, because this was something where ultimately Hunter Biden was going to get off scot-free. And David Weiss and his lawyers, his attorneys, his department, they were in on it, as were Hunter Biden's attorneys as well. And so that is yet another example of how these two sides coordinated to protect the Bidens. And what I would say, and what I always not so affectionately refer to the Bidens as, the Biden crime family. But what about the statute of limitations? This is also part of the discussion about how David Weiss, and this is why Weiss has absolutely no credibility, is because there were parts of this investigation where Weiss just conveniently let the statute of limitations run out.
Remember the WhatsApp message that everybody got spun up about a month ago? I would remind people, the sequence there is, Hunter does this extortionate message where he says his dad is sitting there with him. They're pressuring these Chinese guys. And within about 8 days, they start sending $5 million that gets into the Biden family coffers over the next number of weeks. That call, that WhatsApp message, happened on July 30th, 2017. The $5 million went on August 8th, 2017. Today is August 14th, 2023. Mm-hmm. The statute of limitations for most federal crimes is 5 years. For tax crimes, it's 6 years. All of that stuff is time barred at this point because Weiss never indicted the case. All he needed to do to preserve this case was file an indictment. and then the statute of limitations would have stopped, and you could negotiate a plea agreement from a position of strength.
And that's why this whole thing is a joke. Is because you have Merrick Garland, who it does seem to me like he is trying to make the public perceive that there's some sort of teeth to this investigation. You know, the other thing, and I did pose this to Tom Fenton earlier, you can catch it on the podcast, but one of the things that I asked him was, okay, so you have you have Merrick Garland and you have David Weiss, and they are getting, you know, there's no other way to say it. They're getting absolutely crucified by a lot of the constitutional attorneys across the country, and most certainly here in Washington, D.C. And so I'm just wondering, is it possible that maybe, just maybe, knowing that they've butchered this whole thing, are they maybe looking for a little bit of a do-over? You know what I'm talking about? It's like, all right, we know that we shanked this. And so just what I'm going to do is, Merrick Garland, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and appoint David Weiss as a special counsel, and we can start all over again because the plea agreement was thrown out, and we're going to start all over again, and we're going to really do it right. Do you think that's a possibility? Anyone at all within the sound of my voice, do you have any thought that maybe, just maybe, this is an attempt at a do-over? Personally, I doubt it. Another guy who doubts it? Ted Cruz.
Well, this appointment is camouflage and it's cover-up. I think it's disgraceful. Listen, David Weiss was the U.S. attorney handpicked to lead this investigation, who spent the last 5 years covering it up.
Yep. I mean, Ted Cruz knows, and you know. Listen, you listen to WMAL. You know exactly what's going on. And part of this whole question is just look at the resume or the record of David Weiss. A 5-year investigation of slow walking, of protecting, of doing all he can to help Joe Biden escape justice, escape scrutiny. Same with Hunter.
For 5 years, the investigation has gone nowhere other than to protect Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Not only that, David Weiss is the one that is subject to 2 whistleblower complaints from senior career IRS officials who came forward. They said they'd never seen an investigation like this in their entire time in law enforcement.
Yep.
They said that the Department of Justice, lawyers working for David Weiss, protected the Biden family, that they gave heads up to Hunter Biden before search warrants were executed, presumably so that he could hide incriminating evidence, that they refused to allow them to ask any questions at all about the big guy, about Joe Biden, that they were focused on, you cannot inquire into President Joe Biden's personal corruption.
10% for the big guy. Isn't that what it was? 10% for the big guy? By the way, of course, and adding to all of the things that Ted Cruz was talking about was what I mentioned, where they allowed the statute of limitations to run out purposefully, of course. I mean, here's the thing about, I'm just going to have to go back to that, right? With Andrew McCarthy talking about how they allowed some of the statute of limitations to run out. So either David Weiss is a terrible lawyer or he allowed them to run out on purpose. And that's the only, I think, I mean, I'm no legal, but I think that's the only 2 options there. But why wouldn't Merrick Garland, and here's the other thing that I would say, why wouldn't Merrick Garland, knowing, if you read the polls, if you see where the American people are on this, you know that the American people are, suspicious of all of this, and they're cynical of this investigation. And so if Garland really was interested in bringing back some public trust, maybe some credibility to his incredibly damaged Department of Justice, why wouldn't he bring in someone from the outside? Anyone other than David Weiss.
David Weiss either was an active participant in covering up this criminality and protecting Joe Biden in engaging in obstruction of justice. That's option one. Or option two, he wasn't the driver. He was just complicit. He was so weak that he couldn't stop the partisans in Maine justice from turning it into a political effort to protect Joe Biden. Either case, he is a wildly inappropriate person to be a special counsel.
Yeah, and, James Comer, who I was in Washington, D.C. for the State of the Union for President Joe Biden last go-around, and I met James Comer. And, I think this is a guy who, in this particular case, is really doing great work. And part of his worry and part of my worry and part of your worry, no doubt, if you're paying attention, is how will this impact his investigation? Well, his initial thought is this is an absolute joke.
Well, this is a joke. Yep. All that Merrick Garland did was validate the point that many Republicans have been making, that the Department of Justice was weaponized. Look, I've been very vocal in saying we didn't need a special counsel. I've been on the other side of a lot of my colleagues in the House. The one reason I would give for not wanting a special counsel was what we've seen, the fact that I have no confidence that Merrick Garland would appoint anyone credible. I never dreamed he would do as bad as he did with Weiss. Not only did Weiss drag his feet for 5 years and try to negotiate a sweetheart plea deal with the president's son.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it may sound partisan, but somebody please tell me where he's wrong. And it's funny, in listening to all of this that I'm, talking about, with all of the evidence that Ted Cruz has spoken about, that Andrew McCarthy has spoken about, there's still people out there, I call them, the no evidence people, where their heads are completely buried in the sand. There's plenty of evidence. And so the people that are out there saying, oh, there's no evidence. These are not the droids you're looking for. BS, man. Jonathan Turley was on Fox News the other day. I think this was yesterday afternoon at some point over the weekend. But, he said, and he's one of my favorites, Georgetown University constitutional law professor and so forth. And he says, yeah, this whole thing is really going to lead to even more ridicule from constitutional attorneys and people who know better.
That's right. And that deal has been really ridiculed quite universally as a sort of a sweetheart deal. He just had two whistleblowers testify in Congress saying that the investigation itself was fixed. And so for many people, this is like solving the mutiny on the Bounty by making Captain Bligh an admiral. I mean, it doesn't address the underlying problem.
I love that. Solving the mutiny on the Bounty by appointing Captain Bligh as admiral. What a great way to put it. Fox in charge of the hen house, whatever. The same guy who told these IRS investigators that he was being prevented from conducting a thorough enough search that it would impact Joe Biden, is now the special counsel. Regardless as to whether or not you believe he's a special counsel or not, that's the role he's going to have. It was even, this deal so bad that it was rejected by the judge. Jonathan Turley goes on and he says, yeah, this whole thing looks like a cover-up.
It's like complaining that you think a deck is stacked and a dealer saying, okay, why don't we double the bets? I mean, that doesn't really deal with the problem. And here you've got a U.S. attorney who was accused by whistleblowers of running essentially a fixed investigation where the Bidens were tipped off on raids. There was a refusal to let them ask about President Biden. There was minimal charges. Crimes were allowed to expire. And Garland's solution was, well, let's double down on that. Well, that's not much.
It's almost like they're trolling conservatives. It's almost like they're trolling Republicans. It's like, hold my beer. You think Republicans are ticked off now? Hold my beer. Watch this. We're going to invite David Weiss to be the special counsel. It is unbelievable. I mean, everybody already knows that this investigation has been suspicious. One final audio bite from Jonathan Turley, and he continues to make great points about the fact that there's more than likely no way that there's going to be any real consequences to all of this. At least that's how Merrick Garland is behaving.
This is going to cause even greater concern, and I think they're warranted. And it's also going to add pressure on the Hill because this mandate does not appear to have been expanded. So all Garland is doing is increasing the authority without expanding the scope of the investigation to include Joe Biden.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Thank you very much for listening. Dan Mandis here in for Vince Coglianese. And coming up next, the great one, Mark Levin. Have a great night.